Dipti is also with us. She's here all this week with the newspapers, aren't you, Dipti? You're starting with those anti-Putin protests in Russia over the weekend.
That's right. It's making the pages of the Russian papers. Let's start with the Moscow Times. These protests were mainly led by young Russians. They marched in cities like Vladivostok. They marched in Siberia, braving sub-zero temperatures, calling for fair and free elections and for an end to Vladimir Putin's nearly two-decade reign, according to the Moscow Times. These young protesters braved enormous risks. In one case, one person interviewed said he was willing to be shot if it came to that. The Canadian daily Globe and Mail notes that there was a sort of scripted feeling to everything that is Russian politics right now. Even the way that Putin's fiercest opponent, Alexei Navalny, yesterday marched in the streets in Moscow and then he was arrested. Even that felt scripted because he marched in the streets probably knowing that as soon as the police spotted him, he'd be arrested. The difference now, though, is Russia's young voters once again. And this upcoming election will be interesting, if only to look at the turnout of those who come to vote.
Another story for you now. We're going to talk about Polish legislation. Now, it's actually dampening Poland's relationship with Israel, this, isn't it?
Well, you might say it's even a mini diplomatic crisis between Israel and Poland. This is over a Polish bill that seeks to make it illegal to attribute complicity in the Holocaust to the Polish nation. So Poland says, for instance, Auschwitz-Birkenau is not a Polish name, and the slogan at the entrance of the camp, Arbeit macht frei, is actually German and not Polish. So they want basically laws recognizing that they were not part of it. And Israel, though, opposes the bill because they fear it will whitewash some parts or some of the darker parts of Poland's wartime past. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed to meet his Polish counterpart to diffuse tensions. That's what the Jerusalem Post is reporting.
So what are the reactions been to this then, Dipti?
Well, interesting. There's an article on the front page of the Jerusalem Post that actually sides with Poland on this one. This article reminds readers of Poland's valiant efforts to resist Nazism and note that 1.9 million non-Jewish Poles were murdered during the war, and Warsaw was razed to the ground, essentially. So I quote, "Poland is right to be angry when it's made to appear that they were responsible for the Shoah." And we see this sort of similar anger in the Polish press. Let's show you an article from Superpress, a Polish paper, in which the writer says, "It feels like Israel is, quote, trying to humiliate us for crimes committed by Germans. This spat is, quote, spitting on the Polish people who risked their lives to help Jewish people during the Second World War."
Another interesting story that Dipti's found now. This one's from the Washington Post. It looks at how the Me Too movement has changed workplace relations.
And not for the better. That's what the crux of this article really says, and it's really well worth a read. It's a bit of a long read, but it's very interesting. Male CEOs, male employees, lobbyists, they're all changing their behavior consciously or subconsciously in the wake of the Me Too movement, sometimes at the detriment of female professional success. So, for instance, in one case, a lobbyist decided to travel alone to Washington without his female colleague who had done pretty much all the legwork, just because he didn't want to travel with a female companion alone in a plane on a work trip. In one fire station in Texas, firefighters are changing their sort of locker room banter because they now think it might be actually construed as sexist or sexual harassment. HR divisions are telling staff not to have dinner meetings, that keep it only to lunches. There are also questions about whether you can now hug colleagues. Can you open doors for female colleagues? Is that considered sexual harassment? I mean, the whole boundaries have just been blown. The Me Too movement has moved us all into a period of heightened awareness, this article says. But as one person says, we have to make sure that we don't lose ourselves and our contact with one another in all of that.
I'm going to have to be very careful about the way I deal with Dipti, aren't I? Do I open the door for you on the way out? I don't know.
It's a big question.
Yeah. Now, finally from Dipti, forensic scientists, they've revealed some fascinating details. This is about a skeleton that they dug up. Last September, they dug the skeleton up.
That's right. It's interesting. We talked about Me Too, and now it might seem like we're objectifying men, but we're not. Last year, scientists or researchers discovered a 3,000-year-old skeleton in a Northumberland field. And now the Telegraph reports that researchers have discovered that these bones belonged to a young Bronze Age man, not just any old man, but a ridiculously good-looking guy. He was aged between 17 and 21.
Right.
He stood at between about 1.72, 1.79 meters, which is actually quite tall for the ages. He also had the perfect smile with quote, teeth better than most people nowadays.
Okay.
A real surprise, given that most people at the time had very poor oral hygiene. They also think he might have been a man of great importance, given the way he was buried. In any case, researchers say he certainly could be considered the perfect catch, at least for people 3,000 years ago.
So that there, oh, it's just gone. That image that we saw of the skull, that is a hunk.
That is a major
hunk.
hunk, at least 3,000 years ago. That's
Okay,
right.
good to know what a hunk looked like 3,000 years ago. Thanks a lot. You did with the paper stuff for us, 24. Right.